I always hear that, and I think it's my phone, and everybody has the same very tone. Anyway, we are here today. Man, I don't know. Church, that's a good place to be on a Sunday, isn't it? Good place to be. Now, here's the thing. I've been in different churches throughout my life. There's always a time, like when you go on vacation, and I remember when I was a little kid, we're doing the same vacation this year in my family that we did when I was like this big, okay? Going to Eureka Springs and Silver Dollar City, and we're going to have a good trip. I just can't wait. Now, here's the thing. I was little. I don't know, first grade maybe. And we had stayed the weekend in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which, if you know this about Eureka Springs, there's about 15 more people in Eureka Springs that are here today. You know, at least that's kind of how the town feels. My dad, when we had to get up, I don't know how early it was, like 6, and drive 2 hours out in the country to go to this little bitty church. And I remember walking in, we're in this little bitty church. I'm there with my mom and my dad, and we sat on the back row. I can remember, these are the images that I have. It was boring, okay? Really, it was terrible. They didn't have a piano, and everybody sang a cappella. And a cappella singing when it's good is really good, but a cappella singing when it's bad is really bad. Okay. I remember, another couple of years ago, I don't know, probably been about 10 or 12 years ago, we went out to Washington, D.C., and we stopped in this little bitty church in Pennsylvania. We walked into this church in Pennsylvania. I don't know where it was, somewhere in Pennsylvania. It's all the same. It's green and hills, Completely, think about the exact opposite of the Panhandle. That's Pennsylvania, okay? We walked in, and the preacher up there that particular day, because I was growing up and I could study this from an academic standpoint, how to do church. He said, we're going to try something new today. We're going to sing a chorus. Okay. And they were talking about worship. They were talking about, it's time for our little bitty church here in Pennsylvania to kind of get caught up to like the 1950s. Yeah, yes. Or it's time for us to get caught up back to the 1950s. Oh, chuckle. Okay. You see, because I've seen all different kinds of worship in churches. I remember the first church that I started out, we had 12 people on a healthy day. We had 12. And the songs were terrible. Our music leader was terrible. She loved Jesus, don't get me wrong. She just couldn't sing. Okay? And so, we come into contact. And, how does church work? Because the question today is, when we're thinking about worship, is worship the same as church? Worship over the last 10, 20 years, and the church has become this strange thing. Because there's people that'll say, oh, you need to have some kind of experience for it to really be worship. Was off at a church down in Dallas, Texas, there for a conference called the Right Now Conference. That's coming up in November, so if you want to see something amazing, sign up for that when next time comes. Basically, it was 400 preachers, a couple elders, And the band just came out and they started singing. And all of a sudden, I felt some emotion. It's like, man, that's really cool. I've been in churches where the long-haired guy gets up with the glasses, and he's got to use a prop here. Don't turn this on, by the way, because we don't want this on. But the long-haired guy with the glasses comes up, and he's playing his guitar, and everybody's just worship. And then walks with us, oh man, wasn't that a great worship service? And I walk away thinking, I don't know, you're a really good guitar player, though. You ever been in a church like that? Where it's kind of more about the things that are going on than about Jesus? And so as I try to break down this whole idea of what worship in the church is, we live in a strange world. You know, we live in, even if you take a look at our community, you know, we have churches with bands, and we have our little church with the piano, and then there's churches that just do different things, and we just try to say, oh, this is worship. But is it really worship? Here's some things that are coming out. This was released this week. I think it was Monday. In the last 7 years, people who claim the name or the title of Christian in the United States has gone from 78.4% to 70.6%. In real numbers, that's 178-some million people that have walked away from their faith in America. During that same span of time, people who said that they were atheist or agnostic, or that they would say that they have no religion, went from 16.8 to 22.8. So 172 million people increased in what they said that they just don't have any kind of religion. We live in an America where we have "in God we trust" on our currency. And yet we're not allowed to say that in schools. We live in America where worship and church and the things that we try to process as the things that we should do is getting really, really rather skewed. Now this is an old survey that I found. It goes back to 1999. George Barna with the Barna Research Group interviewed church people and said, define worship. Now, Barna had this pretty broad description of what a biblical definition of worship is. And out of the church people that they interviewed, 36% of what they described what worship is came within a biblical definition of worship. Which tells me something. We in America have probably some misconceptions and misunderstanding about what worship really is. Some of us think that worship is a style. You know, I can get on my phone and I can bring up praise and worship music. When I'm working in a garage, I turn on my praise and worship music and I listen to it, and it's like, man, that song's a really good song, but I don't know how theologically accurate it is. And then there's people who see worship and praise music like this. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He has a lot of cattle. God has cows. God has cows. God has cows on 1,000 hills. God has lots of cows. He has brown cows, black cows, white cows. Cows that give milk, cows that don't have milk. He has cows on 1,000 hills. Hey, God has cows. God has cows. Oh my goodness, God has cows. And that's sometimes how we come to worship music. It's like, same verse 192 times. Okay? Somewhere in the mix of what worship, we call worship in church, I wonder if we really get down to what worship in church should be. You see, because I wrestle with it. I do. But here it is, some things. If you get nothing but a little uncomfortable today, then that's okay. But here it is. Worship is really about God and not about us. Anything that points to us, we're doing something wrong. Okay? Because here's what happens. We take a look at church in one of two ways. We will go and we will be a part of a great music experience, and it's like, oh, I just didn't really get anything out of the sermon. Or we'll go to listen to a guy preach, but we really get nothing out of the music. And I'm thinking probably both things are incorrect. It's not about the music, and it's not about the sermon. Okay? Worship is about God. See, worship has nothing about what you and I have ever done in the context of church life or Christianity. It's about coming to engage the Creator, living God, who gave His Son for you to die on a cross, and that Son rose again. Jesus is His name. He ascended on high. He's coming again. And when He comes, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. Now, as a pastor, I have always had people come to me and say, oh, pastor, we should play this song in church. And I was like, I don't get it. Okay? And that song does something for you. It does nothing for me. But here it is. I'm a pretty simple guy. This is going to sound really sad. There's some music that doesn't move me. And then there's some music that probably moves me too much. But is it about music? Or is it about God? What I want to challenge you today is, how is it that we worship? This is going to sound strange, okay? And it may even seem, pretty simple, okay? Worship will determine your destiny. Now, yeah, I know it kind of sounds corny, and I get that, okay? But I was in a corny mood when I wrote this sermon, so you might just have to deal with some of it, okay? But worship will determine our destiny. Book of Revelation, chapter 14. You're thinking, wow, talking about worship, going to Revelation, that's kind of weird. Well, it is a little weird, but follow me on this here, because they're actually doing some worship things in Revelation chapter 14. In Revelation chapter 14, verses 6, that's 6 through 12. I had 90, that looks like a 92. That's 12. I'm not going to read 80-some verses. Okay, 6 verses will be good. Revelation chapter 14, verse 6. He said, I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel, to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, fear God, give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and the springs of water. A second angel came. He said, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. And the third angel followed them, said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives the mark on his forehead or his hand, he too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of His wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast in his image, for anyone who receives the mark of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus. Worship shows up in this passage in the declaration of the eternal. It's the declaration of the eternal. The first angel comes and says, worship the Creator God. Worship the Creator God. We live in a time where you can flip on the channel to the Discovery Channel or to the History Channel and see Creator God being summarized in nothing but billions and billions of years. And somehow between our education and our faith, we come to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It is that Creator God that's at the fundamental parting of where it is that we in our culture are going. And it's not just about worship, but it's about faith. Are we going to put our faith in the random, or are we going to put our faith in Creator? There's a command there to worship the eternal, creating God. Now, I'm not sure where you stand on that. But it's a command that we worship the Creator, God. There's another part about this thing about Babylon. And Babylon in the book of Revelation is this entity, this location, this country, this kingdom. Probably the kingdom of the earth is about the best way that I can say it. Where it's all about me. It's all about whatever it is that we can accomplish. It's about success and everything else. An amazing thing is that there's no worship there. It's just existence. Just existence. Oh, I don't want to get too committed to that church thing. Or I don't want to get too far away from that church thing, because you just never know how it's all going to pan out. Well, the ambivalence of it all sometimes catches up with us. Babylon in Scripture is a strange mix of idolatry and apathy, and what I've seen over the years, they kind of go hand in hand. And then we have this next part here in this little passage. That he who worships the beast will join in his torment forever and ever. Now, here's the thing. If you were to take a poll, hey, would you mind worshiping a beast where you can have eternal torment? Is anybody going to say, yeah, I want to sign up for that club? You know? About the closest thing that I can think of as eternal torment here on earth, signing up for a club, I found this on the internet the other day. I was like, oh, I need to do this. It's build the Millennium Falcon. Oh, the Star Wars guy, build the Millennium Falcon. Your first payment's only $60. And it goes on for 25 months. Not only would I build it, but I would have the rest of my days in eternal torment because I did. You know, you follow what I'm saying, guys? Oh. And we just had $60 a month, though. Here's the thing. Nobody will sign up for the club that has anything to do with eternal torment. But the reality of it is that they're deceived. If you worship the beast, it's eternity. If you worship God, it's eternity. You see, our worship matters. It determines our destiny. Now, this next part here, I'm going to have to get a little, I don't know how to describe it, a little mystical, maybe a little esoteric, a little weird, okay? But you're used to me being weird, so that's okay. We're going to go to the book of Hebrews. We're going to go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, here it is. Taking a look at worship, okay? Hebrews chapter 12, we're going to pick up here in verse 18, okay? Talking about this, about location. So you've not come to a mountain that can be touched, or that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast or some other voice speaking words that can be heard. It begged that no further words be spoken to them. Talking about the mountain in the Old Testament where the commandments were given. It's because they could not bear what was commanded. There was a commandment when God was giving the 10 Commandments that even if an animal touches that mountain, it must be stoned. And the sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I'm trembling with fear. So God's guarding around Mount Sinai. He's got the people around him. There's this big command. I mean, you have to get ready for a week. If anybody touches the mountain, if you do anything, you got to. If a guy goes up there and leaves the camp and tries to touch the mountain, you're supposed to shoot him with an arrow. I mean, you talk about disobeying the law. I just want to touch the mountain. Trust me, as a guy who's got a mountain in the garage, shoot me. Okay? Shoot me. It's really good. But here's the thing. He said, you have come, though, in verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God, You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, and to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. Because when they were given the Old Testament command, and they were warned how not to do that, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? It says at that time his voice shook the earth. Now I can imagine it'd be a pretty cool thing to be back in that crowd. Where Moses goes up on the mountain, there's this cloud up there and everybody's around there kind of being quiet. And God starts giving the 10 Commandments and the ground underneath you shakes. That would be an experience. At that same time that his voice shook the earth, he's now promised one more time, I will not only shake the earth, but the heavens. The words once more indicating that the removal of what can't be shaken, that is, the created things. Now here it is. I was saying that where you worship has permanency. Okay? Most of us, when we think about worship, we come to church and we do the church thing, and we love to sing the songs, or we love to get into a moment of prayer, or we love to hear God's word being preached or prophesied or being spoken. And here it is. This stuff around us will be gone. If you have a piece of wood next to you, think about what you're sitting on. Knock on it for just a second with me. Okay? Feel that? The amazing thing about wood is that if we were really cold, we could all get together and we could have one big bonfire. Okay? Amazing how God says that when he comes, it's going to be with fire. And somehow through our faith we persevere, we're refined through the fire. That this world that we know it will be consumed by fire, and this stuff that we think is pretty important will all pass away. It's not eternal. The writer of Hebrews, when he talks about the earth being shaken and the heavens being shaken, he probably also implied that there's going to be destroyed. This is not where we worship. Finish up with me here in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. Let's see how close with there it is. Hebrews chapter 12. Since then, verse 28, we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Let us be thankful and worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Now, I want you to contemplate this. If the bricks, the stained glass windows, the wiring, the light bulbs, the pulpit, the carpet, is nothing but this physical place, it's going to be gone one of these days. Fingernails, a little bit of hair, toes, legs, heart. My body is all going to be gone at some point in time. Where we worship has our permanency. Remember back in the book of John, Jesus was talking with a woman at the well, and so we're supposed to worship on this mountain, and you're supposed to worship over there. And Jesus has this whole discussion about worship. And he says, I tell you the truth, we worship in spirit and in truth. Things that are eternal, not things physically. So number one, we're supposed to worship Creator God. Number two, we're supposed to worship Him in the eternal part of us, not the physical part. Because all of this as good as it is gone. We don't worship in our earthly human shell. Here's the last thing. What does a church really look like when it worships? Paul wrote to the Corinthian church. We had this read to us a little bit earlier today. And it goes this way about worship. Pick up here in verse 20 in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Now, we're going to pick up here in verse 23. So if the whole church comes together and everyone speaks in tongues, and some do not understand, or some unbelievers come in, will they not say that you are out of your mind? Now, tongues is basically a way of saying, if you're going to do something that's spiritual, and speaking in tongues back then was something very spiritual. If somebody comes in and takes a look at that, it looks weird. My dad told me a story. Somehow this lady was going to a church she really wasn't too familiar with. I think it was somebody that he worked with. She had been a nurse's aide. Okay? She's sitting down in the pew. Somebody behind her starts praying in tongues, which is a different language, prayer language. The nurse part of her kicked in, thought that she was having a seizure and swallowing her tongue, hopped the pew and tried to restrain her. Now that's a bad day at church. That's going to church and not quite expecting something, And for the lady finally to have to fight her off and say, all I'm doing is praying, she said, oh, I'm so sorry. She never went back to that church again. Just crazy things happen. And basically that's the argument that Paul has for the church. He said, you can do all your spiritual things, but when people come in and take a look at it, oh my goodness, it looks really weird. So when we get together, what is worship? What is church supposed to look like? And this is what he goes on and says. There it is. But if an unbeliever, verse 24, or someone who comes in who does not understand, comes in while everybody's prophesying, and that is while we're talking about God's word, he will be convinced by all that he is a sinner, and he'll be judged by all. Now the amazing thing about this judgment is not this judgment, okay, not that judgment. But yeah, you're one of us, come on in, okay? You're one of us, come on in. All the secrets of his heart will be laid bare, so he will fall down and worship God, exclaiming this, God is really among you. Here's what our church should be like. We're going to worship Creator God. Going to worship the Messiah, Jesus Christ. It's not about the physical things. It's about our eternal soul, who we worship, how we worship. See, the music doesn't matter. The location doesn't matter. The stuff that we do, the liturgy, the bulletin, I know, I'm saying it, the bulletin doesn't matter. It's really strange because this is the first church I've been in with a bulletin for like 10 years. Like, how'd you do? How'd you know what we're supposed to do? I just shut up and preached. Here's the amazing thing. There's a lot of things that we think we have to do in church, but very few things that we must do. However it is that we do it, if somebody who comes in, who's just walked in right off the street, walks in, sits down in the back row, they sit down back there and they take a look. And if they walk out saying God isn't there, we're doing something wrong. Okay? When we worship the way that God intends us to do, it changes other people's lives. not sure how you worship. I don't know if you come for the speaker. I don't know if you come for the music. I don't know if you come out of obligation. Come to worship. Come to worship the Creator God. Come to worship Jesus Christ, who loves you, who gave himself for you. Express what God's doing in your life and let people see God is there. I've been shared this by a gentleman who attends here that I have a lot of respect for. So God's doing things in our church. Yes, he is. Let's never make it anything more than that. Would you please pray with me?